Hi, this is Malcolm Groves. Today I just want to give you an overview of the Git support which has been added into both AppMethod and RAD Studio. I'm going to assume that you've already got Git installed on your local machine. If you don't, in the IDE, if you just bring up the help, come over to the index and search on Git. You'll see one of the items is Git integration in the IDE. Click on that. This will give you a link to download Git. On Windows it's just an exe installer. Run it. You're smart people, you can figure out how to follow the installation. Once you've done it though, probably the most important thing in here is this Git setup. Make sure that you go through this little section here, specifically at a command prompt, configure Git to have your username and also your email address. Okay, if you've done that, then inside the IDE the other thing to do is just point the IDE at the Git exe, and you can do that by bringing up IDE Insight, which is F6, typing in Git, and the first option there actually shows the Git preferences page. So if you bring that up, you'll notice it's under version control Git. There's a few things you can mess around with here: colors, layout of the commit screen. The most important part is to point the IDE at the Git exe. So I just took the default installation directory, which puts Git in C program files Git bin, and then we just need to select Git git.exe. Okay, then we're done. So there's a couple of angles that I want to approach this from. Number one is if you're creating a new project and you want to add it to a local repository. The other is if you are pulling a repository down from GitHub or something like that. Okay, so we'll do a new project first. So let's create a new project. Again, I'll hit F6 and just create a C++ multi-device application. Works in Object Pascal as well, obviously. Let's create it. Let's save it somewhere. I'll just create a new folder in here called Git test, and I'll just take the default names. Okay, all good. Now that's actually not, that directory where I've just saved that isn't a Git repository. So the first time, you don't have to do this every time, but the first time you save a project into a directory, you need to actually turn that directory into a Git repository. So if I have a look out here, there's my Git test directory. So if I cd into that, we can see my files that I've just saved. If I type in git init to initialize a Git repository in that directory, then I'm good to go. So I've got that. Probably the first thing I want to do now that I've created my initial project is do a first check-in. If I right click on the project manager and go down to the Git directory and go commit, I can either choose to do just the project directory or the entire repository root. In this case they're the same thing, but I usually try and get in the habit of going from the project directory. You'll see when you bring up this commit screen there's nothing in there at the moment. Well, that's because none of our files are currently have been added to Git. Yeah. So if I select show unversioned files down here, you'll see all those files that I've just added. I'll check them all and then just put in my initial comment of, I don't know, my first check-in. So let's commit that. Okay, we see down here in the messages view that the commit has completed. Let me do a few more changes just so we've got a little bit of history, and then I'll go and show you some of the other features. So let's add a button to our form, and let's put it in just an on-click event. Save all of that, and I want to check that in again. So let's go back to my project, right click, commit. This time those files, because those files have already been added to Git, which we just did a moment ago, they're showing up immediately. If we had created a new form, or some new files, we could do the same trick as before, show unversioned files and add them. But in this case, I'll say, what's another awesome commit message that I can do? Added a button. So let's do that. Let's do a commit. Add one more thing, just so I can show you another feature. So let's add an edit box as well. Okay, but I won't check that in yet. Okay, let's go back to the history tab. We can see there's my last commit in the Git repository. All of the revisions that are part of the repository are shown with this blue icon here. This is the current file, and also this is the current buffer. So this is the file on disk. If the buffer in the IDE had changed but not been flushed to disk yet, then these would potentially be different. So this lets me walk through and have a look at the contents of those files. Yeah, and note up here I can switch between the C++ file, the header file, and also the form definition, the FMX file. Further, if I come over to the information tab, I can see all those same revisions, but I can click on one of them and see both the commit label from Git and also the comments that were made, as well as, of course, the time and the date. I can then come over to my differences page and select, for example, my first revision and the current file, and go through and see actually what's changed between them. And we can see that between those two, what's been added to the form definition is the button and the edit box. If I look between these two, it's just the edit box. If I flip back to, say, the header file and look at those two revisions, we can again see what's been changed between them. Step through the differences here so we can see what's going on. One other kind of nice thing is we've got blame integration as well. So if I come back to the C++ file, if you're looking through those differences and you notice that, okay, someone's added this button click event, you might want to know who did that. Yeah, maybe it's some code that you're looking at which is causing a problem, and you want to, before you make changes, you want to understand who made those changes so you can go and talk to them and figure out why they did it. Maybe there's a really good reason that they did it, so before you undo them, it's a good idea to talk to them. How do you know? Well, if you come up the top here and sorry, we should select one in the one of the revisions that are part of the repository. If you come up the top here, this third icon across is called annotate. This is basically going to, if we select this, down the left hand side of the source code, it'll show us what revision each of these lines of code was last changed in. Yeah, so in this case, this button click event was added in this particular revision, and if we hover over it, we can see who the author was, when it was committed, and also the comment that they added. Yeah, so this could be helpful in tracking down who the last person was to change this code, so that you can figure out why they did it. Let's go back out to our form though, and we've added this edit box, and remember I've saved it, but I haven't yet committed this to the Git repository. Yeah, so if we come over here, there's a couple more things we can do. If we right click and go down to Git, we can commit it again, and we bring up that same screen again. But sometimes, especially if you've done a reasonable amount of work since your last commit, you might end up with a bunch of files in here and you can't actually remember what it was that you changed in all of them. You're about to write your check-in comment and you can't remember what it was, or can't remember everything that you did in these. So one nice little thing is if you right click on one of the files and say show me the difference, it'll take you straight into that that diff view in the IDE, and you can walk through the differences to refresh your memory that, that's right, this is where I added the edit box. Yeah. So we can then, once we understand that, we can then go back to our commit view and go, right, my comment. So I'll say added edit to form. Awesome, Malcolm. So let's commit that. Okay, again, we can see our commit completed. The other thing that I want to show you in here is if you've got a project and you bring up, rather than commit, you can also go in and see the log for the repository or the project directory, and go through and see all of the commits that have been done and all the actions that have been done, what the comments were, and also which files were part of that commit. So whereas the information tab on the individual form showed us all of the commits that this form had been part of, the log screen shows us all of the commits for the entire project, and for each one all the files that were part of that commit. So we've seen how to add a new project to a local Git repository. Probably the other most frequent thing that you would want to do when it comes to version control is pull, or in Git terms, clone a remote repository down local so you can start working with it. I'm going to use GitHub for this example. If I come over, if you're up on GitHub looking around at basically any project, you'll notice that down the right hand side here they give you a URL for cloning. Yeah, that's the URL that we want. Okay, so if you once you've found a repository that you like, whether this is internally in your organization or on GitHub or on Bitbucket or somewhere else, once you've got the repository and you've got the clone URL for that repository, if you copy it, come back into the IDE and go to the File menu and say Open from Version Control. Yeah, so if we select this, it'll prompt us to see which version control system we want to use. In this case I've got Subversion and Git installed. I want to use Git. Say OK. The source for the repository that we're about to clone was that URL that I just copied. Yeah. The destination is just a local directory where you want to put that. Actually, let me put it in the projects directory as well. I'll make a new folder called Fluent Query. Say OK. Select that. This is now going off over the internet, in this case to GitHub, to pull down that repository. It then looks through for any projects, any project groups inside the information that it's just pulled down, and we can select one to open. In this case there is only one, so I'll say OK, close that. You'll notice it's opened it up inside the IDE for me, and then we can bring it up, and at this point all of the those same features that I showed you a second ago still apply. So we can come over to the history view and look through the history for this file, which commits it's been part of. We can go and look at some differences between them, say between this one, and see what was changed, what was added. We can come over to the contents, select one that's in the repository, and have a look at the blame or annotations, and see when these items were added. All of the same stuff that that we were doing a moment ago in the other project are now accessible, but on a remote repository. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a little kickstart on the Git integration inside the IDE. You saw in the help before, there's some more information you can get in here. You can look at the equivalent, how to do the equivalent of various Git commands inside the IDE, how to clone, committing changes, a lot of what we just looked at. Reverting changes, we didn't look at that, but that's worth going and having a look at. So come into the help and have a look around, but hopefully that's got you over that initial curve of getting started with Git inside the IDE.